Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with David Joseph, Jamie Soden, George Ortega, Michael Walsh, and Trick Slattery. And today we're going to be talking about what is religion? How do we define what is a religion or what is not a religion? This is a very confusing topic because even though I have an idea of what religion is, when it comes to actually describing it that we run into a problem of it being either too restrictive or too broad. So I want each of the co-hosts to be able to weigh in on how they would try to define religion and what comes to their mind when someone hears that word. So should I start or does somebody else want to jump in?
Well,
David,
you could start, and then I can go later.
Okay. See, my idea of religion, it, of course, is heavily influenced by Christianity, but I try to see how different religions, which include, also Islam, but also Hinduism, Jainism, and stuff, they all seem to have certain characteristics. For one thing, they believe in gods or deities that are these sort of personal forces that reward and punish, and they get angry. They tend to have all these emotions, and so they are assumed to be the cause of natural disasters, like God's punishing people. So they believe in gods. That's one thing that a lot of religions have in common that I've noticed. Another thing they have in common is the belief in an afterlife. And that's what I think that without those two elements, these religions tend to fall apart. So that's kind of how I think about it. So basically, religion is some system where you better act this way or you're going to be punished either in this life or your next life by some god who is mad at you. That's what I think religion is.
What do Buddhists believe? Do they have a god or gods or anything like that?
Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them see the Buddha as divine, or they see the Buddha almost as like a god man, like a demigod who came to Earth, who everywhere he walked, like flowers sprung up from the ground of his footsteps. Other Buddhists just see him as a regular human being, a mortal of flesh and bone, like everyone else, who was just a person who had a tremendous amount of insight into the human condition. And the religion is really just spread around his philosophy. In that case, that version of Buddhism would really just be a philosophy. Like the God versions of Buddhism, the supernatural ones, and especially the ones that include reincarnation, would be more of a religion in my book.
Yeah,
So it
I
could
mean,
be either or.
I think a key aspect is what you just said there, supernatural. I think there's a lot of like you don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be a belief in a god, but if there's supernatural belief involved in there, I think it's a religion, and especially if there's a group of people, a cultural system,
Yeah,
um, then they all believe these type of supernatural beliefs, then I think that could be called a religion, regardless of a belief in God. Well, if they believe in reincarnation, or if they believe in an afterlife, or if they believe in anything supernatural like that, I think it tends to be equated
yeah,
to a religion.
I agree. See, the problem with religion, though, is that it's one of those philosophical terms that is extremely hard to define. Like, for example, justice or knowledge versus belief and stuff like that. These are really deep questions, philosophical questions that are really hard to define, and religion is one of them. In my assessment of religion, of definitions of religion, the one that I think both best encapsulates the concept of religion is this one. Religion is the belief in, worship of, or obedience to a supernatural power or powers considered to be divine or to have control over human destiny. And so, what that definition does is, as you were saying, Trick, the Buddhists who believe in reincarnation, there must be some kind of power out there that makes us born into the new life. It has control over human destiny. So that would be a supernatural power out there that has control over human destiny. And that would technically fall under the definition of religion that I gave, even if it's not necessarily a god who is a man in the sky, an invisible person or whatever like that. It's a power out there, a force, like a
Right.
metaphysical force that has control over human destiny in some way. It determines where you go in the afterlife. And so that would technically qualify as a religion. And so also technically deism would fall under as a religion in the definition I gave, because deists do believe in a divine being that they believe in, but they don't necessarily think that that being gives them any kinds of commands, and they don't necessarily even think that that being has to be worshipped. They
Right.
think that the being just gave you a brain and used your logic and evidence and reason to try to figure out your own stuff. Figure it out for yourself. I'm not going to give you the instructions on what's right and wrong or what is and what is not true.
Yeah.
So that
But,
would be that's the best definition I've seen that cuts what a religion is and what isn't. It,
yeah,
it
yeah.
provides like a nice demarcation line between like a secular philosophy and worldview versus what I would really consider to be a religion.
What do you guys think about, because I there's a I think there's a big distinction to be made between theism and being religious. So I think somebody could, for example, believe in a deity or believe in a god, but have no religion whatsoever. So they can actually believe that a god exists, but they're not following any traditional practice or anything like that we would consider religious. So it's
Well,
com.
well, here's the
I'm
thing
not.
though.
Yep.
A religion doesn't necessarily have to be organized. I mean, one guy believing in a particular god, that's a
Yep.
religion. I mean, just think about the when Muhammad first got his revelation, quote unquote, in the cave. At that moment, he was the only guy who knew about this, right? And then he
Right.
spread it to people, and people started following. But to me, the religion begins once the person believes that there's some kind of power out there, regardless of whether it talks to them or not. So even one person believing in a god, to me, that's a
Yeah,
religion.
that idea is interesting, because like I think in law, for example, something is not considered a religion until a certain amount of people actually um, are a part of it, basically, until it becomes a system.
You
So
got to
so
have like 1,500 signatures.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know what the number is, but there's a certain amount that says, look, it can't be a religion if there's only one person. So at least legally, anyway, someone can, I guess, think of it as a religion, but in the legal context of tax deductions and things like that. Um,
Yeah, but isn't a religion in a literal sense? Isn't it an assumption in a supernatural being or supernatural force when there's no evidence of being such?
Well, the person just has to believe it. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have to be true to be a religion. So
Yeah.
they just have to believe that there's some power out there. But what
Mm.
Trick was talking about is interesting. I mean, and that throws up another interesting question. Is like, what is the difference between a cult and a religion?
right, exactly, I think it's a numbers game as well. So
Yeah,
I think
I mean,
I think
most
when
people think yeah, most people think that the only difference you can think of is the size. A
yeah.
cult is basically a religion in its early stages. And once it gets enough people, then it becomes quote unquote a religion. But it's
Right.
really the same thing. It's just how many followers you have.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like Scientology, where at the beginning they had very little, and then they built up to actually become um, in the eyes of the law, a religion. So
Did any of you guys see that Scientology documentary called The Scientology in the Prison of Belief? It's really, really, really good. I recommend you find it and look it up. The Scientology basically launched like 1,000 lawsuits against the IRS and but harassed them and bugged them. And they had spies that were going after the IRS, like individual agents in the IRS, to try to like dig up dirt about their personal life, like were they
yeah,
cheating on their spouse? Did they look at porn? And they were trying to like ruin all their reputations and smear them. And then the
yes,
Scientology basically said, "Hey, look, if you grant us religious status so that we're tax free, we'll drop all these 1,000 lawsuits overnight." And
oh yeah,
after like 3 to 4 years, the IRS basically backed up, was up against the wall, and they said, "Okay, fine, fine, you're a religion now. You don't have to pay taxes. Just drop these freaking lawsuits." And that's how they got their religion status.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, so
Yeah.
well, I know it's that Scientologists or the Scientology in general is known for going to people's houses and really just annoying the hell out of people, especially people that have left Scientology. They've
Yeah. That's
So
known
what
for
they do.
guys, I
destroying their
want to
life.
introduce the exploration of like religion relative to like our understanding that we don't have free will in terms of what controls whatever controls everything. Because like as you were saying before, religion seems to connote the idea of a supernatural, and supernatural technically means something beyond what we know to be natural. So, if we're kind of like to follow the causal chain behind every one of our decisions back to the Big Bang, and we have to acknowledge that before the Big Bang, we don't know what happened. Could, in a certain sense, what happened before the Big Bang be considered supernatural?
But how
Not
can
if,
Let's
it be
well,
how can it be unnatural? I mean, everything that's known to science is natural, quote unquote, isn't it? So
But it's not known to science. That's the thing. We don't know nothing about it.
So, George, are you trying to say that when we don't know about something, it's supernatural?
Um, in a sense, yeah. How could we make that distinction whether we just don't know about it or it is in fact quote unquote supernatural?
Well, I don't. That's interesting because I think the problem with that is that it depends on our knowledge of something. So if there's something that's supernatural, then it becomes natural as soon as we know about it, and that I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me.
well, this actually could be its own podcast because
yeah,
the
that's a
debate over supernatural versus natural is a huge one in philosophy, and it's actually a very hard distinction to make. I mean, as you were saying, as Chandler was saying, I mean, something that is unknown to us, is it categorized as supernatural until we know about it or until we can assess it scientifically, and then does it suddenly leave the supernatural box and get placed into the natural box? I mean, it's a huge debate. To me, something natural, I mean, I'm a naturalist, for example, right? So I don't believe that there's anything supernatural. But generally speaking, the way I see the distinction is, on naturalism, the world, the universe is only governed by natural forces in the sense that they're impersonal forces. There's no mind or consciousness behind it. There's no being that is aware that says, okay, this thing is going to happen here and that thing's going to happen there. They're just impersonal, blind forces that travel according to different laws of description in science.
So
And
you,
so
you're
that would
basically
rule out, obviously, any kind of God.
right. So you're basically saying the distinction, isn't so much, religion and science isn't so much between the natural and the supernatural, but between the personal and the impersonal, like between
Yeah,
defining what came before the Big Bang as either personal or impersonal.
right. If before our Big Bang was simply another universe or a black hole or something like that, to me, even though we don't fully understand it, we can't fully describe it scientifically, that would still be natural, because whatever that is before the Big Bang, it's still just blind, impersonal natural forces. It's not
Well, let me
a
ask.
being.
So let me ask a question. Is the issue of consciousness or beingness or personality, you know, consequential? In other words, like, does it really matter? Something is making whatever happens happen. Like something, like before the Big Bang made the Big Bang happen, and so like now whatever happens is a result of whatever happened before the Big Bang. So basically, what's the relevance of either identifying it as personal, conscious, or inanimate, impersonal, when the salient issue seems to be that of control, that however we want to define whatever it is, it seems to control everything.
Right, but I guess under the idea of a typical, like a classical theistic god, the omni god who is immaterial, presumably that type of being could never be described scientifically. Like we couldn't have a mathematical equation that would describe God, presumably, right?
Um, well, I mean, how do we describe define a person scientifically?
As a giant bag of atoms.
Well, I think I want to respond to what George's question was about, like, is it really consequential about the consciousness or personal thing? And here's the thing is that my first thought is, well, not really, because it's just like a tornado blowing a house down. Whether or not that tornado was conscious at that time doesn't make that much difference. But I agree with Michael Walsh's point also that the traditional theistic idea of a god is a god that's conscious and can respond to your prayers. So most beliefs in God require the god to be conscious.
All right, I want to like again explore the distinction between personal and let's say inanimate, like the difference between us and a rock. Now, the idea is like we might define ourselves as personal, but since we have absolutely no control over what we do, no more control than does a rock, you know, does that distinction make sense? We're both kind of like equally compelled. I mean, what does the person definition add to us? That is relevant to this.
Well, you'd be able to assess the difference between a person and a rock as one being alive versus the other. And so, well, but that's another question that gets very difficult. How do you define life? There is no complete agreement on that either. But if we could agree on a definition of life, we can assess the world in terms of this definition and categorize things according to it. A rock would be on one side of the definition, and a person would be on another side of the definition.
Well, yeah,
And a
Yeah.
certainly
person would
in terms
obviously
of
be
life.
conscious.
Yeah, certainly in terms of life, I definitely understand, appreciate that. But in terms of control, like basically like what we try to say, like some people say, some people have more free will than others. And we explain, no, nobody has any degree of free will. And so like, extending that, we don't have any more free will than does a rock. And that's where I'm kind of like, introducing this idea of like what the question of what the distinction of personhood means within the context of control.
Within the context of control, there isn't a whole lot that it means, but within the context of how causality happens, there's a whole lot of what it means. So obviously, rocks rolling down the hill have a totally different causal influence than a person running down the hill that whose brain state at this time can determine it whether or not they're going to go right or left. So it's not a matter of free will control because neither the rock nor the person have that, but there's a important distinction to be made between the two different types of causality that
Well,
are
I mean,
happening.
I understand in terms like, for example, if we want to address human behavior and we want to motivate in one way or the other, but most fundamentally,
Right.
if we understand that like the most fundamental cause of why a rock moves and why we do anything we do can most generally be described as the state of the universe at the previous moment. So, like, then you have the universe in its totality, controlling what we would kind of otherwise identify as our, psychology and motivation and, these personal attributes.
The
So
universe wouldn't have any more control either though. So even the universe in its totality has as much control as a human or a rock, which is none.
no,
So
no, and trick, yeah. When I say the universe, I guess I have to it's not that the universe in the present has any control, but the evolution of the universe, that causal chain regressing back, eternally,
Yeah, that has no control either. So
But
so
that, yeah, like, because a person changes over time, right?
Um,
Where would the distinction be between the person and the universe in this aspect, if you're considering control to be the distinguishing factor?
all right, I think the distinction is like, for example, relative to free will, human beings, rocks don't have a free will because we are like governed by causality. We're caused, by the previous states of the universe to do what we do. Now the question then becomes, I think, and Trick, this may be where think you were going, that because the causal chain regresses back eternally, we can't ever reach a point at which we can, assert that the universe chose or decided anything. So because you were saying that the universe doesn't have any free will either, is that
right.
what you're saying, or?
I'm saying if we're going to postulate that there's an eternal causal chain, then obviously that's not any control that the universe has. And if we postulate that the universe came into existence, then there would have to have been an acausal event, and that's not controlled by the universe. So
Right, but
so
no,
we're
no, but
stuck
I
in a
know,
conundrum there.
but wait a minute, right? Because like, I understand. So like, but I mean, by that perspective, we're concluding that nothing is in control of anything.
Correct.
Another, right?
in,
But
in,
like,
in the context of control that we're talking about when people say free will, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. It's an incoherent concept.
well, I mean, certainly in terms of us, but I mean, like, so if you're saying that the concept of control doesn't exist relative to us in our decisions, what you're saying is that like we do what we do, um, and nothing is controlling or making us do it. Nothing is causing us to,
No, causality is different. I mean,
fundamentally.
we're being caused. Of course, we're being caused to do things, but it's not like something is controlling that. Like there's nothing in control of those causes. Those causes have to output the way they do based on the cause that precedes it, based on the cause that precedes that. So there's nothing that has more control than humans or rocks. They're all equivalent in regards to this word control.
Well, I certainly. What I'm saying is like, for example, the law of causality, or just the universe governed by this law of causality, to my mind, seems to control everything. The rock, everything we do. We don't control anything. To say otherwise would mean that we and rocks are doing things, but absolutely nothing is controlling anything.
I would
George,
say the latter is a better way to say it.
how would
Go
you,
ahead.
George, reconcile a determined universe with the idea that the universe is somehow in control?
Well, causality controls the universe. I mean, like the universe basically evolves moment by moment, state by state, in a causal manner, and that process is what controls everything. Now, I have to concede that because that process regresses eternally, there's a problem there because we can never reach a point at
Yeah.
which we can conclude that a decision, a a decision about control was ever made.
Right.
But I
So
think,
Yeah,
so
that
nothing controls the process. The process is just there. That it's just a natural fact that extends backward in time, or whatever we want to extend it to. But
yeah, like given physical condition X, physical condition Y and Z would physically deterministically follow, and there would not really be any control over that at all. There would never be a moment where free will or control comes into play at all. Even if we posit that the universe has a finite amount of time in the past, then the first event would have to be acausal, in which case there's no control there either.
and to get back onto our topic, even if we posit a god, for example, that god ultimately has no free will either. It has as much control as a human or a rock, at least in a logical context.
Well,
For-
I would suggest that the question of control is similar to the question of an eternal past versus a finite past. You know, in other words, like I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Or let's say extend it to infinite space, which might be easier. Does space, you know, go out infinitely, or does it not? I mean, like it seems like this, or better yet, how about like the question of like, can you keep getting smaller and smaller and never stop getting smaller? And does this principle therefore apply to every quark, to every, you know, point in the universe? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like there seem to be certain aspects of reality that transcend our ability to logically understand. And so that as eternity and infinity seems to fall under those categories, control, I think, most fundamentally linked with eternity and perhaps infinity seems to be part of that also.
I'm not sure where you're getting the control part from that.
Yeah. Seems to me like compatibilistic control.
I think I want to jump in here, guys, because I think the issue here is that the type of control that different religious belief systems require their deities to have is not a type of control that can really exist because there's really no free will. There's no point at which those gods can actually make a choice that's up to them. So I think there's a actual conflict between either causality or acausality. Both of them cancel out religion because those religions require a free will belief that at least God has free will.
I know.
Well, if free will is logically incoherent in principle, then how could a god have free will?
Right.
Exactly, and yet if you were to ask these believers if their God has free will or ultimate originating control, they would say yes. So their belief is requires free will belief.
Yeah. I've always asked like Christians who say that well God pre-exists and then he created the universe. And I've asked them like, okay, does God think in like a temporal order? Did he like debate like what kind of universe am I going to create? Universe X versus universe Y and universe Z. And then he deliberated and he says, okay, well I'm going to create universe Z instead of the other ones. And a lot of people will say, no, God does not deliberate that like that. He has all his knowledge at the same time, infinite. But if he was already decided that he was going to create universe Z infinitely, then it was not logically possible he could have created any other universe. And it would seem to me that God could not have had free will in that case. It's like God exists eternally in a frozen state with his decisions already made for him. And there's no way it could have been otherwise. And it seems to me like that never made logical sense.
Right.
Well, I think we should use the example of, like we were talking a little bit earlier before the podcast about, people who pray to God to help them win the Super Bowl, who help them to win a football game, and they thank God for taking their side and making their team in the football game win. And I think that there we get the picture of what kind of belief they have is that their deities are a person who takes a personal interest in which football team wins and intervenes in some supernatural way,
Yeah.
and yet they believe that they are controlling God at the same time by praying to him for their team to win.
Yeah, I mean, just think of what that would entail. That would mean the guy throws the football, if we're talking about American football, and God, while the football's in midair, God kind of like nudges it just ever so slightly to make it into the goal to the goal post after the punter kicks it. Whereas it wouldn't have happened naturally. Naturally, the ball would have went just to the side, but God nudges it. He like blows like, and then the ball goes to the other side. That's really what you kind of have to envision if you believe God decides football games.
Well, I mean, like, think about it theoretically. Let's say, there was a God. Let's say, you know, we can't prove it, but let's say there was a God, and let's say this God, you know, even though like we don't have a free will, programmed us to pray to it, in certain ways and, whatever. And then this prayer would influence God's response to us. I mean, theoretically, conceptually, that actually is possible.
Isn't that God praying to himself?
Well, absolutely. I mean, but that's the same under this like secular no free will perspective too. I mean, we're all puppets. It's all God's show.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are people who talk to themselves, so I
No,
guess
but
if the universe is like a regular psychotic person,
Well,
the
yeah, it's
universe
not
would
that
talk to
far-fetched
itself.
of an idea. The universe.
Like universe multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it is funny, but yeah, I think that when you look at examples like that, I think most people, most religious people, they're not thinking about it deeply, like, well, that God had to create them in such a way and give them the genetics and the environment that caused them to pray to God to get a specific outcome. So
Yeah.
God made them pray to him, and
it's
it's so that's what's interesting, is that's what determinism implies, and that's why I have a lot of fun with this idea.
Yeah, it's like me creating a robot that and then programming that robot to at 5 o'clock tell me to press its button, and then at 5 o'clock it says, "Trick, press its button, press my button." I press the button, and whatever the button does for the robot, because the robot's telling me to press the button, which I already programmed in the robot. It's yeah,
right. And
Yeah.
doesn't make any
yeah, the
sense.
point I was
And
raising
then
is
you
that
can
like
deny it just to like be a dick.
no, but the idea is like just as it works with this no free will perspective, it works with a religion. In other words, like prayer could be a quote unquote button.
Yeah, it's almost like a reminder that God put in place. He programmed in a reminder to do the prayer, which reminds him to output some event in the world.
Which it implies something else, Trick. It implies that God needs reminders because God doesn't remember things, and yet he's omniscient.
Yeah,
This is
Well,
all basically Calvinism.
no, but guys, you got to remember, like the same kind of assertions you're making, toward a theistic conception apply toward this secular no free will perspective. God is just like it's orchestrating everything.
Yeah,
Or
or
the
just
sorry, the
natural
universe.
impersonal forces are doing it.
yeah.
Huh?
Or, George, the other alternative is that it's just natural impersonal forces doing it. And
Right,
there's no end goal or plan or final causality. It's just randomness happening, and it just so happens that the complexity of life like us arises in the same way how complexity arises when you mix milk with coffee. There's all different kinds of weird patterns and, complex stuff. We're
right.
the
Well,
mixtures of that.
I wouldn't necessarily argue, present a theistic argument, but I think a rational argument would be like, I mean, are we positing that there's such a thing as true randomness? And if we are we suggesting that true randomness is equal to acausality or means the same thing? And then, so are we suggesting that everything happens acausally? If not, then are we then rejecting acausality and therefore randomness and concluding that there has to be some kind of like at least an order, a causal order?
It's a causal order that doesn't come about through any purposeful means. It just happens. So it's not that we're postulating a causality necessarily. It's just that we're saying that there's no real rhyme or reason for it. It's part of the process that exists either eternally or if it didn't exist eternally, then a causal event would have to happen. But either
But
way,
or if we as a human being like create something, a work of art, then we would kind of like conclude that we did it from a purpose, whatever purpose that might be.
right?
Now, since we don't have a free will, that purpose really can't be ours. So like it's kind of like the universe giving us purpose. Now, I guess you might claim that well, there's no evidence that the universe has purpose.
Right.
Um, and actually, since our purpose isn't our own, I guess in a certain sense, there's no evidence that we have purpose, because again, it's conferred to us by the universe. So then,
Just
are
because
you?
it's conferred to us doesn't mean that we don't have it. So it's like saying just because we have a heart and the universe prior to us evolving a heart didn't have a heart doesn't mean we don't have a heart. It just means that that's where causality led. So same thing with our specific purposes that we as humans have was an output. It was a causal output, but there was no reason for it. Just as there was no reason for our heart, other than that's where causality led to.
Well, let's take something like our instinct to survive, that I believe is an evolutionary feature, right? I think we're all kind of like programmed to survive, survival
Well,
instinct.
unless we're fatalistic.
Right. So like, all right. So if we have this instinct to survive, and let's say evolution, is partly guided by that, then wouldn't purpose fit under one of the purposes, one of the explanations for evolution, that like evolution is guided by the purpose to have the organisms both
No,
evolve and survive.
it
Yeah.
would be the reverse of that actually, because evolution has no say whether someone survives or not. Rather, survival is a product of evolution. So when the creatures that want to survive survive, and the ones that don't want to survive do not survive, the ones that do survive pass on their genes to the next generation, which tend to have those same traits. So it has nothing to do with evolution saying let's output something that wants to survive, or that doesn't have anything to do with the evolutionary process. It's just a product of the evolutionary process, the output of creatures that want to survive, because those that want to survive procreated to carry on that gene of the
Well,
instinct to survive.
then the matter changes from survival to procreation. Apparently, some organisms are better adapted to procreate, and
Yes,
wouldn't that be a purpose?
that is. And sea turtles, for example, have thousands of babies a year, and only one of them live to procreate. So evolution says that's okay because it doesn't care that 999 baby turtles die in the process as long as the one procreates and has another 1,000 turtles, because it doesn't say anything about survival. It just says that if the thing survives, it'll pass on the gene, which for turtles, it just having as many babies as you could possibly have to get to the next generation.
But we can even explore this at a level more fundamental than evolution, because evolution is also causally, brought about. So basically, if evolution, the outcome of evolution is that organisms, quote unquote, evolved, then wouldn't that be a purpose of the whatever causes evolution?
Whatever
Well,
causes it. No, it's just cause. That's
well,
what causally happened. So it's like
it
saying, would rolling down a rock that in which wind hits it and makes the rock roll down the hill be a purpose of the wind? And no, that's just the wind hit it and the rock rolled
Right.
down the
No, no.
hill.
But when you use wind, you're using something inanimate. But like we have to go way more fundamental than that to kind of like define um, the entire universe, or the fundamental cause of the wind and everything else.
Well, the fundamental cause of the wind are the inanimate forces in the universe,
Right.
like the four main forces, which is electromagnetism, the strong and the weak nuclear force, and gravity. Everything eventually reduces down to those four forces, no matter what it is.
Right.
Right. And well, I
And
mean, we're
they're
still
blind, and they don't they have no there's nothing in those forces at all that where you can say like there's a later purpose that it was for. It's just those four forces interacting according to the laws of quantum mechanics, and there's no input. It's just like complexity and things that we think are purpose that happen are just like things that happen. They're just coincidences that result from this. They have nothing to do with the initial process itself.
Hey
Well,
guys, I have a question. What's the purpose of purpose?
I think Richard Dawkins answered that. He has a whole video on YouTube about it. And he concluded it's to buy his book.
Mike,
I'm just kidding.
are you saying that like that there is no unified theory that basically like that beneath there's no fundamental level beneath the four fundamental forces?
Well, no. The standard model. Well, there's two things right now that we don't really understand: dark energy and dark matter. But the thing about dark matter, at least, is that whatever it turns out to be, whether it's a energy or a particle or whatever, it has no effect on the four forces because it's too weakly interacting. If it was able to interact with the four forces, we would have figured it out already. So whatever it is, it has no effect on the evolution of physical matter that we all see in our everyday lives that go according to the four forces.
All right, but again, like the whether it's dark matter, dark energy, or something else, like the question is like, is there something more fundamental? 'Cause, I mean, like Einstein spent years, in search of this unified force, this, this this explanation to bring the forces together. Now, are you saying that such a force cannot exist, that we just haven't found it yet, or?
No, I'm not saying that it can't exist, but I'm saying that if it does exist, it cannot have an effect on the atoms that make up our bodies in such a way where it would be what determines the outcome of anything. Whatever that force is that's out there, it's so weak, it has to be so weakly interacting that it doesn't interact with the atoms in our body. And so,
All right.
therefore, it cannot have a that cannot be the purpose for how the atoms in the universe unfold.
Okay, Mike, I think you're kind of like you're using the dark matter and dark energy as kind of like descriptors of what this force might be, because certainly they have very, very weak influence, but we can posit that the force has nothing to do with either dark matter or dark energy.
That would still not matter at all. Because the main point is whatever this force is. Let's say it's not dark matter or dark energy. If it interacted with our atoms, we would scientifically have discovered it by now, and it would be part of the standard model of physics
Well,
because all the tests we have, and we've done a lot of tests, we've done over a century of tests, it rules out any force that could influence our atoms. And that's one reason why we know that dualism, substance dualism, is false, that we don't have souls, for example. The
and
soul
any
simply could not interact with any of our atoms in such a way that we would not have been able to detect it already. We would have been able to detect it already.
any
um,
oh, go ahead.
well, all right, because like I mean, then we have to acknowledge that if it's a unified force, it is more fundamental than the four forces, and it explains the four forces. So, like, I think we'd have to at least acknowledge that it indirectly, through the four forces, influences everything.
I don't think
Hey,
you need a unified force. You just need a unified theory that entails the four forces. I mean, when you're saying a unified force, you're kind of postulating this other ethereal thing that exists, and
like
Well,
Star
yeah,
Wars.
because I mean, what do you think? I mean, that's what a unified theory is attempting to do. It's attempting to understand gravity and electromagnetism, the weak and strong nuclear force within one, unified paradigm. Which I think we can define that
But
as a force.
it doesn't require an additional force necessarily. It
right.
just has to figure out scientifically and mathematically how, for example, gravity behaves at the quantum level. That's really what it is, because gravity is outside of the other three forces, and the problem in science is being able to unify them. So we have relativity that describes gravity. We have quantum mechanics that describes the other two, and when you use the equations of relativity down at the quantum level, they break down. And so what we need is simply just the correct equations to know how gravity behaves at the quantum level. but it
Right.
doesn't
I,
require a
with
new
you.
force.
yeah, I'm not. I think we're in agreement. I'm not arguing for a separate force, but I think
Okay.
I'm arguing for a more fundamental level of the
Well,
four forces.
let's say there is a more fundamental level. What are you saying is why is it different than any other level? Why in terms of what we're talking about here?
Um, because all right, the four forces kind of like quote unquote control things. They determine what happens, what doesn't happen.
Right.
And so then like we're just moving back this level of control to a more fundamental level.
Okay.
Um, and I actually forget what the context of why we were like, yeah.
That's why I asked because I think we kind of getting lost in this discussion on fundamental forces. I mean, I think the point was we were trying to. I don't know what the point was. It was something about the fundamental.
Well, I think we were talking about religion, and we were talking about. I think I kind of evolved from my definition where I mentioned that there's a supernatural force
Yeah.
or power, and that's how this kind of tangent kind of went on. Like George was talking about whether this force has to have a personality versus if it an impersonal force like gravity, for example. And that
Right.
was a distinction between what we would consider a god or divine being versus just an impersonal natural force.
Hey guys, our British co-hosts haven't had a chance to say much yet. Do
Uh,
Jamie or David want to jump in?
I'm
Um, Go on, what?
go- I was just going to say I'm just listening. Are we still trying to describe religion, or
Well,
I've
some
kind of lost the conversation somewhere.
Let me posit what I think religion intended to be initially, and then it changed to I think what how you guys correctly characterize it as like being about a deity and supernatural forces. I think originally we had no science, no philosophy. We were just trying to understand the nature of reality, and so in a certain sense, everything was quote unquote supernatural. Something happened, we didn't understand it, and so like effectively, the effective difference between the natural and the supernatural didn't exist. So,
Mhm.
so I think religion, started out as a way of understanding, just like with alchemy. Alchemy was like, the beginnings of chemistry. It's like they're starting to put chemicals together, see what happens, and then we move on to like a more rational science-based approach. So again, I think religion, most, when it first started, it was an attempt to understand the nature of reality.
I totally agree with that, George, and that was a point that Christopher Hitchens made a lot. Is that religion was basically our first attempt at quote unquote philosophy and quote unquote science.
Mhm.
It was our first attempt to try to make sense of nature, to rationalize it for us, so that we can feel like we're pretty confident in what goes on out there in the world. That's
Right.
why
So now,
it's that's why it's totally flawed in a sense, because it's basically religions were developed at a time when we didn't really know the answer. Those were the answers that we kind of concocted in our mind based on a lot of flawed assumptions and
right,
data.
and the major flaw, I think, perhaps the only flaw, is that they, as their way of like determining truth, rely on what somebody said.
Mhm.
This person says that it's written someplace or whatever, whereas like science and philosophy just rely on reason.
Right, and it's less dynamic, right? So science and philosophy, they're flexible. They change with throughout time. Both philosophy and science have methodologies that have evolved throughout time to the standards that we have today. Whereas religion hasn't done that. Religion is stagnant and stays the same. It's what's written in a book, or um, it's what's described by some wise people. So.
Well,
It's
let me
whatever
ask you
the
something, because
entrails of a goat say.
sometimes we make fun of kind of like what religion posits, like a life after death and et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, like let's take this last century. Who would have
Mhm.
thought in the 1900s that time is different from different perspectives, that time can slow down and speed up and stuff, that I mean, like some of the ideas that we've come about, that we've understood through science, are just as like seemingly impossible as these religious ideas. Now,
Not
granted, I go ahead.
not necessarily that they're impossible, but what scientific what science has shown us time and time again over the centuries is that it generally violates our intuitions. We assess the world, and a lot of our intuitions are to a degree leftover ideas from various religions, and so we assess the world as being a certain way, and then we conclude that, well, it must be that way universally. And then we find out scientifically that that assumption isn't actually true. And it seems as weird and as crazy as some of the ideas in religion only because it's just not commonsensical. Like you can't arrive at the things in relativity or quantum mechanics using pure common sense, like armchair philosophy. You have to get it
Mhm.
through empirical data. There's
Well,
no way you can simply just a priori logically deduce all the things in science. And
all right.
that's
Well,
why it
how
seems weird to us.
right? How would you distinguish between, let's say, a religion that has a belief that, let's say, prayer is efficacious, for whatever, in whatever way, and then the secular understanding that our thoughts influence our body, like the placebo effect, that we can like, minimize pain or eliminate pain and stuff with our thoughts. Aren't isn't I mean, and like this in the second case, the difference, of course, is that we've got empirical evidence for this. So, like, is that the only distinction, that like the certain of the religious claims lack the empirical evidence?
Yeah, I mean, scientists are never going to decide a disagreement by reading the entrails of a sacrificed goat. Religions might do that. So, science and philosophy are intellectual disciplines that, for the most part, are have like a rigorous methodology behind them. Science definitely more so than philosophy, but religions don't have that. Religions simply just many of them simply just go up by, well, I had a feeling the other day. I had this really really strong feeling, and therefore X is true about the universe. God loves me because I got this really really good feeling when I read a certain verse in the Bible or something like that. But
Right.
the
So
prayer
it's not. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
prayer is definite. Scientifically, we know prayer is false. Pretty much every giant test that they've done on prayer. One of the biggest ones I think was done by the John Templeton Foundation about 10 years ago, where they had a blind study where the people with heart conditions were being, like, half of them were being preyed on by people, the other half weren't, and a part of those knew they were being preyed on, the other part didn't, and it showed absolutely no effect on the status of their health. And actually, the status of the people who were being prayed for was slightly lower than the people who weren't being prayed for.
Well,
And
all right.
so, if there ever was a test to assess the legitimacy of prayer, that was the one chance that God or whatever the universe had for making that
But
happen.
wait a minute.
But
That in that experiment, of certain people were praying for other people. Are you aware of research where actually the person, let's say, who's ill or something, is praying for themselves? Because that seems, quite
right,
similar to the
yeah.
placebo effect.
There's those two types of prayers. There's intercessory prayer and petitionary prayer. And if I recall correctly, petitionary prayer is when you're praying on behalf of someone else. Intercessory prayer is when you're praying for yourself directly to God. That study was about a petitionary prayer, people praying for other people. I'm not aware of anybody doing a test on people praying for themselves. I think it would be kind of be difficult to do because you'd be relying on the person telling you whether or not they prayed for themselves or not. And it's kind of a little bit hard to get objectivity there because they could always lie or make up their mind
Well,
or
wait a
something.
minute.
It's kind of
Wouldn't
hard to
that
have blind studies that way.
no? But wouldn't that control apply also to the other kind of prayer where you're praying for other people?
No, because you can definitely more at least more easily assess like this like the two groups of people that were prayed for. Um, one group, you have other groups of people that are praying for them, and so you can say, well, group A is going to pray for the other group A that has the heart disease, and group B are going to pray for another group B that has a heart disease, but that other group B is not going to know that they're being prayed for, and so that was used as a way to kind of get like a blindness, like so that the people who were being prayed for, they didn't know whether or not they were being prayed for, and so they couldn't simply just use the placebo effect to think, oh well, I feel so much better because I know I was prayed for. You know what I mean?
Right.
No, but
There
I
was
thought I thought
there
your
was blind.
objection was I thought your objection was that like in the prayer for oneself, we couldn't verify whether one was actually praying for oneself or not. So like, my point to that was that like that same objection would apply to like we couldn't know whether the person who was supposed to be praying for someone else was praying or not.
I mean, I guess you could do a study where you have 1,000 cancer patients and you ask 500 of them to pray to God to get better, and you tell the other 500 to definitely not pray to anyone, and then
Yeah, right.
assess their condition 5 years later or whatever. Or you could do that with, I guess, a group of atheists that have cancer and a group of Christians. Um, I'm not sure if a study like that has been done, but I'm pretty sure there would be pretty much no statistical difference between either group of
Yeah.
them. Yeah. Uh, but we do know that psychologically speaking, the placebo effect works in the sense that, if someone if you have a difficult challenge up ahead, and someone lies to you and says that, oh, on the test that you just took, you scored number one in it, so you're totally gonna to destroy this challenge, you're totally gonna beat it, and suppose that's a lie. Suppose you only scored in the 50 percentile. That lie that you're being told, like, oh, you on the assessment test you did really well, so you're totally going to get this challenge. That might actually have a psychological effect on you that makes you do better in that challenge up ahead than if someone told you, look, you didn't really do well on the assessment test, you're probably going to lose this. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
in that sense, the placebo effect can affect the way we behave. It can.
right. And then, so that poses another question. In other words, like in some experiments, you have like one person is given a certain size pill, and then they're perhaps given a bigger pill, and the bigger pill works better than the smaller pill. I mean, this is like belief, I guess. I guess yeah, just belief. Putting your mind in a certain frame of mind, whatever, just certainly influences our physiology.
Right.
It's true. Yeah.
And from my perspective, I don't believe in mind-body dualism. So I think the mind is a physical construct of our brain. So if that's the case, then of course it's going to have a physiological effect because the brain controls everything in our body, basically.
Yeah.
So in a sense,
That's why
it's
we have.
yeah. I was just gonna say. So in a sense, it's not mind over matter, but rather brain matter over other body matter.
Right.
Right. It's certain brain states changing other brain states, basically. But I guess to go back to religion, one of the reasons why a lot of people think we are religious in a sense by nature, and that why religion lasted for so long, is just like I said in that placebo effect. Religion gives people a psychological advantage. Like, for example, if you think God is truly on your side in a war that you're going to have to fight tomorrow morning, that's going to motivate you to fight even harder. And if you think, well, God's going to make me invincible on the battlefield, I'll be able to slay all the enemy, and they're not even going to be able to touch me. If you psychologically think that, that could make you a better fighter, for example. And that's one of the reasons that some evolutionary psychologists have said religion was so successful throughout human history.
All right, so getting back to the distinction, like how do we distinguish between religion and science, for example? I think we were exploring the supernatural. So now the supernatural is in religion is like ascribing, and that's kind of like conceptually a bit difficult because like one can define oneself as a materialist or a naturalist and consider that everything is natural, so then there
Mhm.
wouldn't be anything that's supernatural. So how do we make that distinction in terms of what we can define as supernatural or not?
Well, I think categorically it's starting out on the wrong footing, because science is an epistemology, whereas religion, at least according to as I define it and how most people define it, is not in and of itself an epistemology. Religion is not a way of finding out knowledge. Religion is just a belief system itself. The way that religious people find knowledge is by prayer and faith and revelation and stuff like that. So you would have to really compare revelation and prayer with science to have a more categorically correct one-to-one comparison.
Well, what I'm, for example, like, one can't prove that God exists, so God is kind of like considered to be supernatural. But then, in that same sense, can one not prove that consciousness exists? So then, would consciousness, by that same definition, also be considered supernatural?
What do
No,
you mean one?
you,
What do you mean one can't prove that consciousness
consciousness.
exists?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
Sam
I mean,
Harris, for
like,
example, says that consciousness is the one thing that cannot be an illusion, even if we're living in a computer simulation.
well, I agree with you. I agree. I believe consciousness is a priori.
Yeah.
But just like, for example, like, we can't empirically prove that the universe exists. It's a priori. But like, so, I'm wondering if that applies, that this conception of God, can't be proven, but it may be held a priori.
I think that even if I don't think that God's status as being supernatural is not dependent on whether or not we can prove God or not. Even if you could prove the existence of a classically theistic omni-god, it wouldn't somehow not become supernatural anymore. It would still be classified as supernatural because it would exist separately from the natural world. It would not be made of physical matter, and it would be able to violate all the forces of matter in the universe.
Well, but just like Trick was saying that he's a materialist, so that, like, thoughts are material, so like, so that's how we can explain the placebo effect. Couldn't we use that same reasoning for, whatever we might consider supernatural?
In what sense exactly?
Yeah, I don't.
Well, for example, all right, we have, again, look, with a thought, we know what a thought is, but we've never, we know that thoughts are carried through neurons and all. But again, with a thought or consciousness, we don't know what it is, but we know it through its effect. And we can consider it material, kind of like philosophically, because, even just rejecting the idea that I personally believe that the idea of the supernatural doesn't make sense. I think it's kind of like a invalid distinction.
Mhm.
But so just as, like, we would consider thoughts that we can't perceive, we just like infer them, or a priori understand them, that anything else that we would consider quote unquote supernatural. In other words, that's the thing, like, that, like, wouldn't the same description of supernatural apply equally well to, like, a conscious thought as a religious conception, like God, something that we
It,
would define as
if
supernatural?
It could
Yeah,
actually, and that's why people make the distinction between mind body dualism, which actually says that the mind is separate from the physical. It's a non-physical entity, which I think most naturalists don't hold to. Most naturalists, I think, aren't mind body dualists. They think that the mind is part of the physical. It's just a property that the brain produces.
Right,
So
right,
that's
right. Like, returning to the Big Bang, like, we know, we kind of like assume, we're guessing that the Big Bang didn't just, like, happen for no reason, but we have absolutely no knowledge of the nature of what made it happen. So in a certain sense,
right.
we could define that as supernatural, but, I think, again, being a materialist, we would just, like, probably better conclude that it's unknown, but nonetheless, natural.
I would say so. I think I think you're right. I think the concept of supernatural doesn't make sense to me. Like anything that we deem, even if we saw ghosts, for example, if if we saw ghosts and we were able to actually find out scientifically about these ghosts, it would just become natural at that point. It would be that's part of reality. It's part of our thing that we have to scientifically understand. So these ghosts that we've detected somehow through our scientific measures would become part of naturalism. They're not supernatural anymore. So yeah, I
All right,
agree
so
with you that
right,
this
so if
concept of supernatural is kind of a bizarre concept.
I
right,
have
because
a
But
I'm
question.
right, because I'm
Yeah.
Chandler. Hold on, I'm just
Okay.
trying to bring it back to the original point of like how do we distinguish between religion and science or the secular. So if we're going to suggest that the supernatural isn't the distinction, are we then like, is there another distinction beside the personal versus impersonal?
well, I think injecting in things that are outside of what we do know. I mean, even like conceptually outside. For example, if we say that something is non-physical, which I think most people would say, you know, that their spirit is a non-physical thing. I don't even know what that means, non-physical.
No, I
So
agree with
so
you
I would
absolutely.
say that would be considered a kind of a religious belief because it's not even anything that I can conceptualize.
Oh, but wait a minute. I mean, like, can we conceptualize what? No, wait a minute. Like, because like a thought. What's the
Yes.
difference between a thought and a soul? I mean, neither have any substance we can like empirically, identify.
Well, that's why I'm not a mind-body dualist. I don't think that a thought is something that is non-physical.
I know that. So my point is like, why couldn't a soul be physical?
Oh, well, if you're saying a soul is physical, then sure, that would go into naturalism. Yes.
All
So,
right, but
But
again,
it
like,
seems to be seems
so
that
Mike,
that defeats the whole purpose of a soul. But whatever.
well, no, because the
yeah,
idea
yeah,
is like, no, because like, for example, like within the pantheist tradition, like God is material. Like some religions believe that God is like supernatural,
right.
exists outside of nature.
It goes
But
into
so like,
semantics. So if we say heaven is just I don't know, something that our atoms our atoms still exist, so therefore they exist in heaven. If we call that heaven, then we can say that heaven is a physical, natural thing. But most people think of heaven as something that is some place that our souls go.
well, that leads me to a question, and you guys probably know a lot more about this than I do. For example, in string theory, my understanding is there's just four dimensions. Three spatial, one temporal. But some physicists posit there's 9, 10, 12 dimensions.
Right.
Now, do you guys agree with that? And if you do, couldn't theoretically heaven or some other kind of like reality of ghosts and all that stuff exist within one of those other dimensions?
Yeah, we
I
just
don't
don't have a
really.
scientific theory of ghosts. We have scientific theory of string theory, and it's not really scientifically accepted in the scientific community, at least string theory as of yet. Like we have no unified theory currently, and string theory is a unified theory. So there's a lot of scientists that say string theory isn't really science. Um,
I would agree. Yeah. Because
but
I cannot. What kind?
but at least
When
it's
they
a theory that's based on like the mathematics
trick
of certain
trick, what I'm
physics that we
asking
have.
is like when
Okay.
they say dimensions, what are they talking about? My understanding is that like dimensions are like either like time or space. The three spatial, one temporal. What how would one
Yeah.
describe a fifth dimension or a sixth one? I can't understand that.
Oh, did you?
Twilight Zone.
No, no. There's a good video on that. I forget what it's called, but it's called the 10 Dimensions, I think.
But
And
how? I mean, what is this? I mean, explain. Give me a ballpark
It's
thing.
supposed to be. There's these dimensions, according to string theorists. These 6 or 7 or so other dimensions are so curled up and microscopic that we don't experience them in our world. They're almost in a sense like mathematical concepts, but in a sense they're not pure fantasy. Like it has like real effects. Like it's not just an equation on a piece of paper. It can make sense of certain things.
But I don't get it. What I don't get is like, wouldn't those quote unquote dimensions have to exist within space and time?
They would, yeah. They would be spatio-temporal.
So would they then would they be subdimensions? Would be they be dimensions? Because like again, space has three dimensions. So would they be dimensions of these dimensions?
I think that they're like at the most of them, as far as I know, are at the quantum realm, and they're just the only things that exist in dimension. And when we're talking about really, really small scales, I think way smaller than atoms, string scales, which is like 10 to the minus 30 meters, which is really small.
I
But
still can't I can't grasp. When I'm talking
no,
about dimensions, I can't grasp.
I'm the same way. It's very hard to imagine the idea of there being anything more than four dimensions. It's very, very hard. But back to your point, heaven, you don't even really have to go to string theory actually to posit what could heaven be like, because I think the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics gives us a possible, realistic, plausible description of what a heaven could be like. Because in the many worlds view, there are parallel universes existing with us right now that we have no physical access to. But they're just, if we were there, it would appear just like a regular, ordinary universe. But they have no connection once they split off from one another. And heaven, I would suppose, if I want to look at it realistically, as opposed to being a physical place in our universe, it could be like another physical universe that's in another dimension that we don't have access to here.
Well, the many worlds is another thing I can't understand. Supposedly, basically, like, with everything that can happen, actually, an infinite number of things can happen, and they actually do. I mean, like, is this an infinite number of Big Bangs? Because, like,
Yes.
Yeah,
there,
exactly.
there would be, well, the many worlds is really, it's like one universe can split into an infinite number of universe
but wouldn't they
along
be
its length of
wouldn't they be
time.
colliding into each other? I mean, like, for example, like right
No,
now,
no, no, but they wouldn't be because they're not living in the same space time. They're living in other dimensions.
but that's
It's like going into the Twilight Zone.
I know, but so you said they're living in other dimensions. So it gets us back to this, like, what are these dimensions? How can we conceptualize these things? Like, so we're essentially saying that, like, an infinite number of realities can occupy the same point in time.
Mhm.
I think,
It depends
and
on if you want to consider them the same point in time or different points of time that exist in each of the
or
universes.
yeah, or even the same a point in space. I mean,
Yeah,
doesn't
the many worlds is a weird. It basically states that there's different possibilities and they decohere from each other, which means that they split in such a way that they don't have access to each other anymore. So that's what creates the new
But
world or universe.
what's the theory? I can't. I mean, like, I can understand, like, within the context of everything is possible, as a conceptual theorization. But like, I can't see how they would arrive at that from any kind of like empirical or mathematical formulation.
They arrive at it
Well, let me
mathematically through. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just go. Okay, so let me give a kind of brief assessment of it, given my layperson's assessment. So in quantum mechanics, you have the wave function, right? And the wave function is in a superposition. It's in every state that it could possibly be in at the same time. When we measure it, it takes one single state, right? Now there are many different ways to interpret this. In the many worlds view, the wave function that is in all those different superposition states, each of those states is its own universe. So in one universe, the quantum state is here, and in another universe, the quantum state is there. And when we measure it, it decoheres, and we only see the position that existed in our universe that we were in. And the universe, all the other states of the universe split off. But it's not that they begin to exist once we measure. They already existed. And this is true for every single atom in the entire universe. So there's
All
a
right, so
ridiculous
many
number of
many
universes.
worlds relies on interpreting the wave function as an actual reality. I mean, the way
Right.
I've always
Yeah.
understood it is it's just like a statement of our lack of knowledge.
Right. Well, those are the two different views in quantum mechanics. There's the epistemic view and the ontic view. The ontic view is that the wave function is real and objective, and the epistemic view is that it's not real. There's just one state, and it seems as if the wave function is in a superposition, but that's only due to our ignorance of not being able to know where the thing is at any given time. Yeah. So, but the thing is, every single view on quantum mechanics is weird. None of them are really normal. The many worlds is weird in its own kind of way, but mathematically, it's actually the simplest formulation of quantum mechanics. All of the other theories, like the Copenhagen view, for example, has a potentially infinite number of equations. It's not something that you can write down on one single piece of paper, and all the other ones have add-ons where they have to posit new forces or things in the quantum system to get what you eventually get to match with what we get in experimental data. So many worlds is simple mathematically, but it's extravagant ontologically. And a lot of
Right.
the other ones are the opposite. Like they're simple ontologically, but mathematically you have to posit a lot more stuff. And they're all kinds of like very weird relationships between the two. I think one of the most simple ones that I can think of is the Bohmian interpretation. And the Bohmian interpretation, it's a single definite particle. It's never in an actual superposition, and it's guided by a pilot wave. And there's an extra equation for this pilot wave that you don't have in other interpretations. And when you measure it, you find out where the atom was at one single time. But it's in a sense it's one of the most classical kind of views in quantum mechanics, because you always have a single particle at a specific state.
All
It's
right,
and,
so
and the superposition is just like a mathematical formulation.
I think I kind of like accept or understand that more clearly. But like you're talking about the pilot wave, right? So with the
Hmm.
double slit experiment, right?
Hmm.
There's one variation where you fire the photons one at a time, right? So
Right.
they're not interfering with each other, you know. But over time, gradually, one photon by one photon, this interference pattern emerges. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
like, well, how do we explain that?
In the well it, that is the fundamental experiment that
Right.
results in all these different interpretations. In the Bohmian interpretation, the pilot wave interferes with itself as it goes through both slits, and that determines the trajectory of the single individual particle. And they've done like tests on this, like mathematical tests that show you how you can get the interference result when
No, no,
you're firing single
I know,
particles through a
I
slit.
know it's science. I understand that, but like for example, let's say you have like a 6 or 7 bands that develop, right? So one
Hmm.
photon goes through the double slits and lands in the first band. The second
Hmm.
photon goes in the single slit and lands in the fifth. So like basically they're going one by one, and presumably one can't know what the other one where the other one's going. So how can they these singular particles somehow organize themselves to like after 10 minutes or whatever, all line up in these separate bands?
I don't think that logic forces us to entertain the idea that the atoms are communicating with each other, almost as if they were intelligent, and say, "Hey, I'm going to go on that band on the left, and you go to that band on the right, and then the next guy is going to go to the band in the center." It's not like
Well,
that.
that would be my personal perspective, but how else can what other
The
explanations could there
the
be?
band has to do with the wave function. So when you have a wave, uh, imagine a wave on the ocean, for example, and that wave goes and hits a wall. Okay, imagine now something floating on that wave. Depending on where that wave is at a specific point, that thing that's floating on the wave is going to hit the wall at that point. Copenhagen says that the wave collapses at that point. Bohemian mechanics or pilot wave theory says that the pilot wave function allows it to a hidden variable basically to reach that point. So it all depends on if you look at many worlds interpretation, the wave function, it actually spreads out. So each of those possibilities of that wave, the entire wave that hits the wall, are real ontological possibilities that spread out into all these different universes.
But how do any of those explanations, describe how like one by one they're landing in different places, and after 10 minutes they're lined up?
Because a
Well,
wave has a probability
yeah.
distribution. Like I said, like if you have if you have waves hitting something, there's a higher percent chance that the wave will hit the middle point. There's a less higher percent chance that it's going to hit the next point, and then it gradiates to. So that's just a function of a wave itself. If you think about a wave,
I realize that, but under that understanding, you would think that they would all mostly gravitate in the center.
No, because even if you recreate the double slit experiment using actual like waves in water, as the two waves come out, as a single wave comes, it gets split by the two slits, and they come out as two waves, and they interfere with each other in that the
right.
crests and the troughs of each
Yeah,
wave cancel out each other when they're together. And when the two crests are together, they maximize
yeah.
each other. And when you get
Well,
those two maximizations of crests coming together, that's where you get the interference
Well,
pattern
right.
in
no,
the back
I
of the
understand
wall.
that, but you have a single particle, which is like,
Well, it just imagine a single particle being guided by the wave. It's getting pushed by the wave, and the particle is pushed around by the dynamics of the wave, the crests and the troughs. And if you do it enough amount of times, that
Right.
single particle, even if it's going through one slit at a time, as the two waves come out from the other side of the slit, the interference pattern becomes apparent. It develops, and the single particle, its trajectory at that point, what part of the wall it's going to hit, is determined by those two interfering waves. And mathematically, it's going to go where the two crests come together, more likely, and that's how you get the interference pattern.
okay, I think I'm beginning to understand this. Okay.
Yeah. It's very complicated stuff.
But
I'm
then what's
I'm
the
really
difference?
hoping that
What is the, in
I
other
was
words,
just going
like
to
I
say
thought,
I'm really hoping that we get.
go ahead.
Let me just
Okay.
quickly say that I'm really hoping that in the next couple decades we can narrow the pool of interpretations to at least get it down to like a couple instead of the dozen or so that we have now. And I really hope that we get some kind of objective evidence that can show one of them is true rather than the other.
Right.
We got, but a part of it is like, just like these physicists, they don't get that we don't have a free will. I mean, they should get this. This is like, such basic things. Another thing, like, because Mike, I think there's a lack of critical reasoning, and this perspective, and I know I'm shifting a bit on this, but this perspective might challenge people because it's like, there's a standard view that, for example, we have a universe that's however wide, whatever the known universe, but within the known universe, the standard understanding perspective is that it doesn't have a center. All right, now if we accept, as we do, that the universe started out as a singularity, the size of an atom or even smaller, whatever, then how could that point not be the center? I mean, this is like, so my wider point was, if physicists are not able to understand something as geometrically basic as that, I could see how they may be having difficulty with the more complex, kinds of universal theories.
You,
As long as you're not entertaining the idea that we on the Earth are the center of the universe, I don't
No,
really
no,
have a
no,
huge problem with that.
no, absolutely no.
Because that goes into like the old geocentric model of the universe.
Right, and we actually couldn't be, because like the Earth is like 4 billion years old, and like the universe is like 13.7, whatever. So like it doesn't seem like that. Our age would put us at the center.
I mean,
But
I understand what you mean, George, by center, but I think when we're talking about the expansion of the universe, we're thinking of it more as a balloon. So if you look at the center of take a balloon that doesn't have a hole in it, for example, that you're blowing up by hand, but it's just a balloon that's a round ball that gets bigger and bigger. You could say that there's a center of that round ball, but that center isn't really a part of the universe that we know of as our known universe. Everything that we know of as our known universe is on the rubber of that balloon.
But I don't understand that. Oh, wait a minute. So, but wait a minute. No, because like you're saying, everything that we know is on the surface, but or that's the present. I think the surface
Right.
represents the present.
So,
But
no,
we,
the surface represents the universe. That is the universe expanding. So if you can think of all of the galaxies on the rubber, and then when it expands, they move away from each other because those universes are because the universe is expanding. But if you want to look at the center, you'd have to go into the balloon to the midpoint of that balloon, which isn't what we consider part of the universe.
but
It's
I don't
only
understand.
the rubber. The rubber represents space time. All of space time is represented in that rubber.
I can't understand that because, like, again, like
Okay.
you start out with an atom, right? And let's say, it expands, and I think we have to posit that it's got to expand in every direction, 360 degrees, in both axes. And so, like, how could the universe, be, you know, contained within like a shell in a balloon and not include that space that, within?
Because the singularity, though, that one point, it was the start of that rubber balloon, if you think of it that way. And that in the expansion, when we say something expand, like when we say a balloon expands, we're saying the rubber expands. And I know it's kind of a rough analogy, but that's
But I mean,
why people say that there's no technical center of the universe, because the universe is only encompassed on the surface.
why
If you
would
think
they come to that conclusion though? What part of our observations of the natural world would lead to that?
because of the way everything is expanding away from each other.
Right, but that expansion could still, like, for example, like take a balloon. Wait a minute. So, like, all right, huh? That's
There's also the donut theory that the universe is shaped like a donut. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's definitely the most delicious theory in science.
A jelly
all right.
donut.
So,
I like that.
but I mean, like, if the universe is the shell of the whatchamacallit, the balloon, and that's how we're to conceptualize it. We, for example, measure a distance between like us and the nearest galaxy, right? And then
Hmm.
between us and the second nearest.
Right.
And this is spatial. Now, are you saying that these differences are all within the shell of the balloon, and none are like inside of it?
Right. Space time is curved, and then you
But
have. Go ahead.
that just allows for two dimensions. That doesn't allow for depth. It's length and width.
Well, all of the depth is contained within the rubber. So if you think of the rubber, for example, being a thick rubber, I don't know how else to analogize it, but all of the planets and universes, I'm sorry, galaxies, they all exist on that rubber.
Could be a condom.
Exactly. But the fact of the matter is they're expanding outward in a way that there's no planets or anything. There's nothing inside.
Oh,
It's
now
not it's
wait a
not
minute. My understanding trick is that, like, it's not like an explosion, like, like something explodes like a bomb or something.
right.
It's what's the term?
A
Um,
gradual expansion.
well, there's another term other than expansion. It's
Inflation.
inflation, right? So basically, the universe is expanding at every point, right?
Right. And the reason
So
think of the word inflation, the reason we call it inflation is because if when you inflate a balloon, that's what it's like. So
right, but
so
why would this inflation take place basically within length and width and not also within depth?
depth is within all of length, width, height. all 3 dimensions is within the rubber of the balloon.
Well, no. If you have the rubber, like for example, if it's expanding,
Yep.
let's say from the center of that balloon, right?
Right.
Then you're saying that our known universe is expanding as we see it in the shell. That's only width and length. That's not.
No.
You're saying.
All length, width, and height is within space-time, and all space-time is contained within the rubber of the balloon.
But all right, but
Excuse me, guys, but I think
Yeah, I think we're off topic
off
though.
our topic for this episode. I mean, we started out with defining religion and what religion is, and then we got sidetracked into string theory and quantum mechanics and a donut universe. Like, this is hilarious.
That may have been me just reminding myself that I'm kind of getting hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. Did we?
Yeah, so to bring it back to the whole topic, I guess we could, I mean, because these are all questions that are kind of the unknown questions that I think George is bringing up, and they're things that we just kind of theorize on, that we don't really have 100% certainty of or anything like that. So we kind of, if we were to bring that back to the religious thing, it's hard to tell, it's hard to make that distinguishing point, I guess, in between what we're just theorizing and what is, I guess, religion. So there's a line somewhere, obviously, and we draw that line. It's kind of an arbitrary line, though.
But I think the main difference is that science and philosophy rely on a system, system of information, whereas like religion, I mean, it's a system, but it's like based on prophecy because somebody said something, and that so
Right.
we have to evolve beyond that.
Yeah, it does seem like religion is sort of the place where people believe things about things they don't know generally and just theorize about things. And I think that the problem is religion, philosophy, and science all get blended because there's elements of all of them within each person.
Right.
Another podcast we can discuss why religion is dying in the West and maybe what effect that would have on free will belief.
Yeah, that sounds like a good topic.
One thing is the threat of hell. These young kids, they're not buying it. I don't blame them.
Yeah, that sounds like a great topic.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but we've gone for over an hour and a half on this episode. So, do you think we've come to any kind of conclusion where we can end this?
Yeah, we wrapped it up.
Okay, I guess I'll end it. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion, and we started out talking about defining religion, but then we moved on to all sorts of other complicated stuff of supernatural and string theory and dimensions and a donut universe and quantum mechanics, and that's what happens. But if nothing else, this will be a very entertaining episode, even though we didn't really come to that much of a conclusion on our original topic. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.